California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Paul Zellerbach is joining us today. He is the district attorney in Riverside County. And sir, there's been a lot of discussion lately in the news regarding domestic violence. We know that the NFL is under a microscope as a result of multiple allegations focused on domestic violence. October, the month we're in now, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Absolutely.
I want to speak with you about the issue, not only because you are the district attorney, but you were a judge for 12 years, was it?
Correct.
And you were a deputy DA before that.
Correct.
So you have seen the scourge of domestic violence from a lot of different lenses.
Yep.
Talk to us about this epidemic.
Well, it is just that. It's an epidemic, and the problem is for many years it was a hidden epidemic. Right. It was behind closed doors, or law enforcement wouldn't get involved, or it was a family matter. Certainly that tide has changed. And with what we've seen and happen in the NFL, it's about time that domestic violence is now in the forefront of everybody's mind.
So I understand, I hope it's okay I say this, that you became a DA in 1978.
Correct.
A deputy DA, and so you've seen the apparent evolution? I mean, has there been an evolution on this issue?
We've seen an evolution with respect to many different crimes.
Okay.
Driving under the influence, right. Child molest cases, and certainly now we're seeing that occur with domestic violence crimes.
Why is it that there are folks who believe this is not a crime but an issue within a family? I mean, I am flummoxed by it, and I don't mean to be Mr. Urban guy that sees things differently, but I don't understand.
For all too long, it was almost accepted. People were aware of it, whether it be within their family or their neighbors or coworkers, and wouldn't do anything about it. It was accepted almost, unfortunately. And I think now people are becoming more aware, becoming more informed, becoming more educated, and we're all benefiting from that.
So talk to us about what your office, as an example of any larger DA's office, does when an allegation comes in with regard to domestic violence, because I'm sure you know, the facts can be complicated. They can be complex. It's not always as clear as the sky is blue.
It's not, certainly, and these cases or situations always come with difficulties and challenges because they're oftentimes family-oriented. There's children involved and spouses and all kinds of allegations going back and forth.
And it's interesting, I must bring up, I'm sure you heard recently, the mayor of Bell Gardens was killed by his wife, and the facts are still not clear, but the initial facts seem to suggest that she will not be charged with murder, that there was a self-defense situation when, of course, we all thought, the woman's crazy, she killed her wife.
Well, and that's something else, a battered spouse syndrome.
Right.
And that's only been around for the past 20 years or so, and that's evolved as well. And it all recognizes these types of situations are real, they do occur, and they need to be prosecuted.
One situation I understand that's presenting challenges for many departments, prosecutorial departments, is when the partner violence is same gender.
Correct.
I know specifically in the gay community, it can be challenging as opposed to the lesbian community, because let's face it, we still have all these stereotypes in our heads that two men, there shouldn't be one dominant, one submissive. How could that be?
Well, and it doesn't even relate to dominant and submissive. Right. It relates to just two men.
Right.
And again, you have challenges with domestic violence cases, but when they're the same gender,
right,
it creates additional issues about being open and testifying in court, right, and being honest and being forthright. And it makes it even more challenging.
So what does a DA's office do? And perfect timing given that it's a domestic violence month. Is it, prosecute right away, or do you try to divert to try to keep the family unit together? Well, this is hard.
It is very hard and challenging. Years ago, we would divert domestic violence, first-time offenders. We don't do that anymore.
You don't.
We prosecute. But what we do is we have our family justice centers, which are a safe haven.
I know them. Yeah.
We had two, one in Riverside, one in Murrieta. I opened up the third one and the first one ever in the Coachella Valley about 2.5 years ago. And that's where victims and their families can go for help, education, getting a temporary restraining order. We can give them temporary housing, shelter, food, clothing. Verizon, we have a deal with them where that gives them a new cell phone.
Right. What about, and maybe people will bark at me for asking, what about the perpetrators? I mean, at a certain level, with anyone who commits a crime, there needs to be some rehabilitation.
Correct.
And I presume that if you perpetrate domestic violence without serious bodily injury, you're not going to be in jail for 20 years. And so, does a family justice center, for example, provide therapy for the perp?
You bet. And we want reconciliation or reunification if it's possible, but it has to be supervised. It has to be under a controlled environment. Saying I'm sorry isn't enough. We've learned that the perpetrator says I'm sorry over and over and over again and keeps abusing their spouse. So we need to get the conviction, we need to get the person on probation, we need to get them into therapy, court-ordered therapy, where we can have a controlled environment and work the family together to hopefully be successful in the future.
The flip side is the victim.
Correct.
And so often the victim, the self-esteem is so incredibly low that they'll say, well, I deserved it. I mean, that's what they feel. That's what some.
Or they feel responsible.
Oh yeah, it was my fault. I should have made him dinner earlier.
We see that happen all the time. But again, part of the therapy is not only for the defendant to stop the abuse, but for the victim to gain self-awareness and inner strength to deal with that type of situation.
What about the children, the minor children? How do they play into this calculation?
Well, oftentimes they are indirect victims of these types of situations. And statistics show us that children that were raised in a domestic violence situation oftentimes themselves become abusers when they're adults. What
about when the domestic violence is perpetrated by a parent against a minor child? That's a tough one. I mean, I don't slap my children, but I know there are people that do. And so is that domestic violence?
Well, and again, the football situation has raised that as an issue now again. And it used to be acceptable when I was a child being raised. My mother would use a belt. And I deserved it.
Well, maybe not. Maybe you need to go to therapy.
Well, that may be true too.
Right, exactly.
But again, that raises a fine line where, it's discipline versus abuse.
But I gotta tell you, I don't think society has come to consensus on, is it corporal punishment? Is that,
Correct.
or is that only with teachers?
No, it's corporal punishment, or the nuns in school would,
Right.
would wrap your hands with a ruler. We've heard those stories.
I don't think we've come to consensus on this.
We haven't.
At the same time, I want to get a sense what one can do, because this, I may have told you this story a couple of years ago. I remember, I'll never forget this. I was in a bowling league. I was 9 years old. I was that kid that was a bowler. My parents were bowlers. And one of a player on another team, he was 9, he came with a black eye that was massive. And I asked his brother what happened, and his brother said, oh, my mom punched him.
Right.
What does a neighbor do?
Well, that's why we have Domestic Violence Awareness Month for October, because everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody has experienced, seen, or heard about domestic violence in the family, whether, again, it be a coworker, a family member, whatever. And we need to step up. We need to help that person. Sometimes they can't take that first step. They can't report it. So we need to take the initiative.
But help us.
Help us help them.
Yeah, it's just so hard. We have this, it's ingrained in our kind of American psyche that we don't want to get involved.
But the law's changed in that regard too. Now we have what we call mandated reporters.
That's a good point.
Healthcare
Yes,
workers, school teachers, counselors. They're all required by law to report suspected abuse. And again, that's a step in the right direction.
For sure.
Yes, for minors and adults.
Really?
Oh, yes.
So a therapist, for example, would need to report if a husband's being abused by a wife?
If he reasonably suspects it.
That's
stunning. Correct.
Okay, I want to thank you so much for joining us. His name is Paul Zellerbach. He is the district attorney for Riverside County. Of course, this is a Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. If you want to learn more about it, please sign on to the web and learn more about how we can prevent the scourge of domestic violence. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.